Okay, this video is called a book review, and the book is called Caffeine Blues. So here's the cover of the book, Caffeine Blues. Here's the author, Stephen Cherniske, and this is in my list of top 40 best health medical books of all time. And the reason I'm going through this is because in the popular vegan movement, which is mostly what I would call high-fat veganism, they promote high-fat foods, omega-3s, olive oil, nuts, chia, flax, all this stuff, okay, sunflower seeds, almonds, etc., which I disagree with. I recommend low-fat veganism, okay? I've done an extensive study of the effects of fat on diet, and they are not good. I agree with Nathan Pritikin. He said fat is bad. You get enough fat from just the plant foods you eat, and you get enough so-called good fats from the fiber being converted into short-chain fatty acids in your gut. That's the perfect fat, the fiber in that sense. So anyways, these guys are going around saying that drinking coffee is good for your brain, and in my opinion, that's the exact opposite of the truth, and I think I know more than they do, and I will show you why. Whenever you're dealing with something that there's like controversy about it, and this is always the case with popular commercial foods, because these foods are worth billions of dollars, and because of that, there's tons and tons of advertisement to support them. And the food companies they fund researchers, they own the researchers, they own the journals, to make research studies that make coffee and caffeine and tea look good, so they can sell more, so they can trick all the chumps, all the pros. Okay, and a lot of times the best way to think is to just go back to common sense. What do you actually know? And you know that caffeine increases the same hormones as stress. That's cortisol, okay, a corticosteroid hormone. That's also catecholamines, which means adrenaline and noradrenaline. That's also the same thing as epinephrine and norepinephrine. Okay, well then the question is, well, what do those hormones do? Well, they increase blood glucose and lipids. So, and also, what's the purpose of the acute stress response? It's to help you survive the next 15 minutes. The classic example taught to medical students is you're being chased by a tiger in the dark. So whatever that might be, you need to survive the next 15 minutes. You need the energy to run a tree, to fight, to do whatever you have to do to survive, okay? And so you need more glucose and lipids in your blood to provide energy, okay? And for 15 minutes, especially, getting that glucose up will help you. However, chronically elevated blood glucose, what disease does that sound like? Sounds like diabetes. They increase insulin resistance. They also increase blood lipids. Well, elevated blood lipids also predispose to diabetes, and they predispose to atherosclerosis. So people with chronic excessive stress, they have more obesity, diabetes, and psychological stress. And hypertension, and myocardial infarction, and stroke, and atrial fibrillation, and all the things you don't want. And these things are all associated with cognitive impairment. So quite frankly, in my opinion, for anyone to say that caffeine is good for the brain, they're stupid, okay? They're lazy. They haven't done their reading. They haven't done their studying. Okay, it also increases blood pressure, and that's done by causing sodium retention, which is a vasoconstrictor, and just vasoconstriction in general from the catecholamines, a more direct effect. And you need to be able to pump more blood, so you need to increase blood pressure to get it to your muscles as they're exercising. So, yeah, you want the heart pumping harder. All right. However, this increased heart pumping, when it's a chronic thing, like from drinking caffeine, you then get hypertension, high blood pressure, and that leads to atherosclerosis. Hypertension is the main risk factor for atherosclerosis, as well as high-fat diets, and so you end up with impotence. The Johnson often is lost before the person develops coronary artery symptoms of heart disease. That's because the pudendal arteries, pudendal means like shame in Latin, that go to the Johnson, they're only about 1.5 millimeters in diameter, and they're more likely to get plugged up by mural atherosclerosis, meaning accumulation of atherosclerotic plaque along the wall of the vessel. Coronary artery disease, the stentable proximal parts, about 3 to 4 millimeters. You can think of them as being 3 millimeters. That's a reasonable way to think of them. That way you can remember them this way. So 1.5 millimeter is the pudendals going to the Johnson, 3 millimeters is the coronaries, and then going up to the brain is the carotid. Those are typically about 6 millimeters in diameter. So that's kind of easy to remember. 1.5 millimeter, 3 millimeter, 6 millimeter. You start blocking these arteries with atherosclerosis, you lose your Johnson, you lose your energy from the heart not working well, and eventually you start losing your brains from the atherosclerosis, okay? Plus, it's also smaller vessels. Intracranial atherosclerosis are especially associated with hypertension. That's the whole so-called Asian atherosclerosis, of intracranial atherosclerosis, that the hypertensive Japanese used to get, let's say, back in the 1960s. as compared to the high-fat diet, especially causes coronary artery atherosclerosis, and they both cause carotid, but especially the high-fat version causes the carotid arteries in the neck to develop atherosclerosis. Okay, what else? Increased risk of palpitations, abnormal heartbeats just spontaneously firing, and that also increases your risk of atrial fibrillation. Okay, and atrial fibrillation, of course, is made worse by hypertension, made worse by tachycardia, fast heart rate, made worse by atherosclerosis of the coronaries, decreasing the oxygen delivery to the heart muscle. Okay, so its conduction pathways can't function as they normally would. It's all bad. Okay, it's a vasoconstrictor. Like we said, it constricts the arteries that are going to non-essential areas. The only thing you care about is getting just enough to your brain to make you run in a straight direction or whatever you need to do, and getting the blood to your muscles. So it shuts down blood actually to your frontal lobes. You don't need to do calculus when you're being chased by a tiger in the dark. And also you'll notice that if you've got a lot of caffeine on board, or if you're sleep deprived from the night before, which causes increased stress response, you become a little bit stupid and impulsive. Everybody knows, any mature adult over 30 knows, gee, the last time I was sleep deprived, I said things that I regret saying, and I pissed off my girlfriend or whatever, so I'm going to be more careful this time. I'll just keep my mouth shut. That's the smart thing to do. Well, the point is, you become stupid and impulsive when you are sleep deprived or when you got a lot of caffeine on board. Okay? Vasoconstriction to the gut, so a lack of blood supply to the gut, decreases the function of the intestinal lining, it weakens it, and it increases the risk of developing leaky gut. Well, leaky gut's associated with postprandial endotoxemia from absorbing the bacterial endotoxins, the LPS, lipopolysaccharide. It makes your blood prothrombotic. Leaky gut predisposes you to autoimmune disease, all that bad stuff. You don't want it, as well as gut problems, irritable bowel syndrome, intermittent diarrhea, constipation, and all that stuff. It increases glutamate neurotransmitter in the fear center of the brain, the amygdala, as well as in the hippocampus, the memory center. And what it's doing is it's keeping you hyper alert, hyper vigilant. And, hyper alert, hyper vigilant is good when you're being chased by a tiger in the dark. But you know what? You don't want to be chronically hyper alert and hyper vigilant. The half-life of caffeine, it's about, 6 to 8 hours. So that means even if you have that cup in the morning, it's still going to be on board later in the day. Okay, and that's not good. And I can tell you, Dr. Scherzai, and I read their book, The Alzheimer's Solution, they were saying it's okay to drink coffee until 2 in the afternoon. I would disagree with that. I would think the smart move is don't ever drink it, okay? You can see, even if you drink it in the morning, you're still going to have some of this on board. And even if you still sleep, let's say you're 7 or 8 hours, you're not going to sleep as deeply. So you're not going to get the brain's not going to be able to clean itself as well as you would like. The brain cleans itself at night when you're asleep through what is called the lymphatic system. That's a combination of the words glial and lymphatic. Basically, your neurons can't go offline at night, in the daytime, because you're active. You need a precise neuronal microenvironment, so all the ionic gradients are correct and action potentials can be fired rapidly. But when you're asleep, the brain can go offline, as it does. And what is called the lymphatic system means to open up the perivascular spaces of Vertebral bin, so cerebral spinal fluid can then rinse over the neurons and sort of clean them. The neurons pump out their waste products at night, and the CSF, cerebral spinal fluid, rinses them away, okay? And then it's reabsorbed into the venous system typically. Some as well goes into the lymphatic system. The brain has lymphatics within the meninges, okay, like in the dura, so the outer meninges, pachymeninges, if you will, not the pia, the leptomeninges, right in contact with the brain itself. So anyways, the brain does have lymphatics, and then they take it down through the lymph nodes in the neck and whatnot, and remove it there. So in a sense, the brain's doing what other parts of the body do. It's outsourcing its waste management, which makes sense. The great waste management, capital of the human body is the liver. The liver is the detoxification center of the human body, and it can handle all kinds of things. Okay, the brain doesn't have a lot of space. If the brain had to manage all of its waste products, it would need much bigger cells, and then you would need a much bigger skull, and that was thought to not be evolutionarily, or for whatever the reason, efficient, like God's design, or however God decided to make it the way it is. Okay, what else? The neurons couldn't be as close to each other. You probably couldn't think as fast if all your brain cells were so big that they couldn't get up and close for their connections. But anyways, what else about it? Also, you suppress your immune system. You don't need to waste energy and resources on your immune system when all that matters is surviving the next 15 minutes. So you don't care when you're running from a tiger in the dark, or whether or not, you might have an infection, or whether or not you might have a cancer brewing somewhere. It doesn't matter at that moment. However, when you're chronically drinking caffeine or when you're chronically stressed and you're chronically sleep deprived, so you have elevation of these hormones, well, then you're putting yourself at increased risk for infections. You're making yourself immunocompromised and increased risk for cancer. It's your immune system that removes cancer cells. It's your immune system that prevents infections, okay? So that's not a smart thing to do, to immunosuppress yourself, okay? The more closely you look at it, it's like stupid. Okay, people say this, oh man, I'm so stressed out. Okay, well, if you're stressed out, relax, get some sleep, take it easy. You don't want to drink caffeine and increase your stress hormones. That's stupid. Okay, we talked about increased risk of myocardial infarction. Oh, and another reason why you have increased risk of metastatic cancer is because when the platelets are activated, they can hide metastasizing cancer cells in the blood. Oh yeah, so being chased by a tiger in the dark, there's a fear that the tiger might scratch you with its big paws, in which case you don't want to bleed to death. So you're more prothrombotic, you form clots more easily when you are stressed out, and you increase your acute phase reactant blood protein fibrinogen to blood clotting protein. You also increase other clotting proteins, von Willebrand's factor, factor VIII, antihemophilic factor, and you cause platelet activation. So all of these things make you more prone to form clots. All right, well, that's not good if you're chronically prothrombotic, a little bit hyperthrombotic. That increases your risk of a heart attack, increases your risk of a stroke. It's not good. Okay, you don't want to stress out, the old man in your house, because, you increases risk of having a myocardial infarction. Okay, what else? It causes increased urinary excretion of calcium. Well, increased urinary excretion of calcium means increased risk of kidney stones. Kidney stones are no fun. Okay, most of them are small and asymptomatic, but once they become big enough to be symptomatic, they either dislodge from the kidney and get stuck in the ureter, causing obstruction, causing a backup of urine, hydronephrosis, which can become infected, pyelonephritis, and then that needs to be treated with, let's say, either a stent from below and a urologist going through your Johnson with a big urethroskope. Urethroskope's about 1 centimeter in diameter. It's like the size of a man's thumb. Do you want that up your Johnson? I don't think so. And if they come in the back through your kidney, they got to put a tube that's about the same size, again, about 1 centimeter in diameter. That's called a percutaneous nephrolithotomy, all right? And I used to put in tons of percutaneous nephrostomy tubes when I worked primarily as an imaging-guided surgeon. Okay, so what I'm trying to say is you don't want somebody sticking a big tube in your back. It hurts. My father had a kidney stone, and he told me it was the worst pain he ever had in his life. Okay, you also excrete more of your magnesium, and you need magnesium as a vasodilator. You need magnesium to run the potassium sodium ATPase pumps in all your cells' membranes, but especially your neurons. So you increase your risk of excitotoxicity. Well, guess what? It's an excitotoxin. Excitotoxicity means overactivation of brain cells, while simultaneously it's a vasoconstrictor to your brain. So you're increasing neuronal activity, like in your hippocampus, while you're simultaneously vasoconstricting blood flow to some of your other areas in your brain, and there can be some overlap. Okay, you're screwing yourself. It's stupid. You're increasing metabolic rate while decreasing blood flow to some areas of the brain, and you don't want to do that. And the more you piss out your magnesium, the bigger the problems will be. Magnesium is an essential ion. You need that to run any reaction with ATP because it holds the second and third phosphates together. It's got a strong positive charge, 2+, and it can hold those strongly negative charged phosphates in place until the body's ready to release them. That's what it's supposed to do. It also blocks the NMDA receptor for glutamate on the postsynaptic cell of a neuron, so it helps prevent excitotoxicity in a big way. Go ahead and read some papers on excitotoxicity, and you'll say one of the most important things is to maintain normal magnesium levels to lower the reactivity of the NMDA receptor and thus not allow more calcium to flow through that NMDA receptor into the postsynaptic neuron, thus causing potential for excitotoxicity. Okay, you don't want that. That's why it's so good to eat plants, because you get more magnesium. Okay, you also get more potassium, a vasodilator, things that are the opposite of acute stress. All right, and then not to mention that people often put milk or creamer and high fructose corn syrup sweeteners or who knows what else, stevia or something into their coffee, all stupid. That's another thing too. Stevia is often recommended. Stevia is stupid. It causes infertility. Okay, I would stay away from that stuff. Tea often will concentrate, F minus or AL. Herbal teas, my botany professor laughed. He said only an idiot would drink herbal tea. He said because you don't know what's in it. Don't get me wrong. Maybe there is some good brand out there, and maybe somebody knows about a good herbal tea, and it's good for people. So I don't want to be cavalier by saying that. There might be some really good herbal teas, but all I'm saying is make sure you know something about it so you know what's in it. I wouldn't just randomly drink some herbal tea where you don't know what's in it. I would look at that label real carefully. I'd look at who's manufacturing manufacturing, I would want to know that it's the good stuff, if you will. So I want to be fair about that because I know there are some potentially good things with tea. But I personally don't drink tea because I'm worried about these two things. But I'm no expert on tea, so I don't want to act like I am. And I know some pretty smart people do drink tea, so I'll back off a little bit on that one. Okay, coffee is heavily sprayed. All right, but what I'm basically saying is it's pretty obvious that coffee is not good for your brain. And somebody's going to say, well, I quote this paper and this paper, or the balance of papers, there's more positive papers than negative paper. I go, yeah, recently the industry is going to fund all kinds of things telling you coffee's good. All right, I'm just going to go through, there's tons of references in that book, Caffeine Blues. It'll go through all kinds of, more than you could want, details about the problems with caffeine. But I'll just show you, here's one paper about the effect of daily caffeine use on cerebral blood flow. How much caffeine can we tolerate? Caffeine reduced CBF, cerebral blood flow, by an average of 27%. Great. Isn't that fucking brilliant? Excuse my language there. Isn't that brilliant? Okay, so you don't want it, you don't want that. It's stupid, okay? I don't want anything that's going to reduce blood supply to my brain while simultaneously increasing my brain's metabolic rate, like in my hippocampus and amygdala and some other areas. No way. Okay, don't get me wrong. When you're young, you're 20 years old, 30 years old, your body's got a lot more physiologic reserve, and you can handle it. You can compensate for it. But the older you get, the more fragile you get, and it is not smart to be, ingesting excitotoxins. It's not smart to be ingesting vasoconstrictors. Okay, things that predispose to all your problems. Diabetes and hypertension, the things that cause dementia, the big ones. All right. Well, anyways, I hope that was helpful.